Welcome everybody, this is Christian from Germany. In this video we have a look for the very important Rookendgame, which is called Lucena Position. And in this video I will show you by a very easy way how to go for a win with white here. At first I have to explain you what is the Lucena Position. Lucena Position is when you have a pawn one square before promoting and when your own king is blockading the pawn, so you cannot promote directly. And at first we're gonna make some rules for that. The first rule you have to remember is that you have to make space for your own king that he can escape from the 8 rank. And the best way to do this is to give the check with the rook to d2. And now the funny thing is black's king cannot come inside to e6, but then you have the winning move king to e8, and nothing is gonna stop this pawn from promoting. So he has to go outside, for example, king to c7. Second rule is don't come outside with the king immediately. You have to play the prophylactic move with the rook to build the bridge later on. In this position here, the move is rook to d4. Why rook to d4? You have to look that there are 2 ranks between the rook and the pawn. Here's the pawn, here's the rook, 2 ranks between them. So then you're safe that this is the right square for the rook. And then you can come out with the king. Very important. Okay. For example, black plays a move here, king to c6. And then you can come out with the king. And now here comes the third rule. If black tries to give you some checks with the rook, you have to go the zigzag way. Here, 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 and then later on build a bridge. And here I will show you that. Rook gives this check, king here, check, check. Then you go the zigzag way, and after the last check you build a bridge with the rook, and nothing is gonna stop you to promote this pawn. Now let's have a look for a kind of different line when black tries a tricky move. And it all starts with our first rule, rook to d2, give this check. And then before we saw king to c7, but now black can try the tricky move king to c6, for example. Then our second rule is placing the rook to this rank when there are 2 ranks between pawn and rook. So we have done well. And now the tricky move from black is to play king to c5 and attacking the rook. And here's a simple and very strong reply where you can remember this is to place the rook behind the pawn to build a bridge. And now it isn't hard to play as black. Okay, for example, now black tries to go with the king here, but then white's king can escape. And now the promoting is coming near. For example, black plays this check here, then white's king is safe behind black's king. And nothing is gonna stop this pawn to promote. And next I will show you also a tricky try from black. It all starts with rook to d2 check. This is the first rule. Then the king goes to c7. Then white tries the next rule, placing the rook on d4 before he comes out with the king. And then, for example, black tries this waiting move, rook to f1, king comes outside, then he gives a check, here, check, here. And now a big mistake from black now is to give this check immediately because king can run out here and he is building the bridge. So, and now here's a more tricky move, tricky try from black is to play king to c6. And we have to think, what will white do? White wanna place the rook here to f5 and build a bridge, and then nothing is gonna stop the pawn. And here is a trick for black. For example, the white player tries to move rook to d5 immediately, but this is a big mistake. Because after rook takes on f7 and after king takes, this is a draw. So that cannot be played by white. And here's a way how to manage this. And the star move here is rook to d6 check. And then king cannot come down because after a check and he built a bridge. So this is not possible. For example, king goes here, you go anyways, rook to d5, and nothing is gonna stop the rook to come in. And then this pawn cannot be stopped. That's all in these 2 tricky lines from black. At least I want to show you a simple mistake which you can do with white, and this is to break our second rule. I will show you that the first rule is giving the check with the rook. King has to go outside here, and instead to play rook to a d4 and placing the rook, you can make the mistake and come out of the king immediately. And then black has the option to give some checks. Here, check, here, check, and soon or later white has to come back to f8. And it's all for nothing. And this is not a big mistake because the king can go back and then you can do it right. But on the other hand, it's for nothing. Yes, it's a waste of time. At this point, I have to mention that Lucena position is always a win for the advanced player whenever his pawn is between the b file and the g file. Except the pawn is on the a file or on the h file, that's kind of different story, and I will explain you that now. Let's give you an example how to manage an endgame, a Lucena position with an h pawn or an a pawn. And the first thing I would say is when both pieces, the king and the rook, are defending both of the squares here, there's no way to win this as white. The only try, for example, is to play rook to a7 check, king here, rook here check, king here, and to play rook to g1. But the problem from white is that the black is not forced to take the rook. That will be winning for white. Instead, he can play a waiting move like rook to d1 and nothing will happen. For example, check, king here, check, here. The moves are only repeating and this is completely drawn. Let's have a look for another example when black's king is on e7, instead on f7. This is also draw game. The reason is white cannot go in one move with this rook on the g1 square. That will be winning here. So I give you an example. Rook tries to give this check, king goes here, rook gives this another check, and then the king reaches this square. And remember this position here, this is completely drawn. So there's no way to win this with white. Here we have a winning position for white. Simple reason is that black's king here is too far away from white's pawn. If there are 3 squares or more, this is just winning for white. I will simply show you why. Rook to a8, then king wants to come in, and then the rook comes to g1. And the king is not on f7 and can stop the white king from coming out. That's the reason. So we can just go away with the rook like before, rook to c1 for example, but then white's king can escape. And if the rook tries to give some checks, rook to g1 check, goes out of the way, check, here, check, here. And then white just go the zigzag tactic, and after this move, the question is clear who's gonna win, and the winner is white. That was all I want to tell you about Lucena position. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something about your endgames. Bye bye.